My dog's going to be in the shop.
Welcome in, everyone, to Notre Dame football live here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We talk Fighting Irish every Monday. We got Nathan Erbach on the line as usual, along with Mason Plummer from Slap the Sign. Nathan, how you doing today?
I'm great, Mark. I don't know why I can't figure out this microphone situation that we
This is the
talked about
best
last
Nathan
week.
has sounded like in the last 20 minutes of trying to set this up. So we're going to go with it. How's the dog doing?
She's doing good. She's right here.
She's
a big
looking
Notre
good.
Dame
It's a good-looking dog. What's her name?
Her name is Ellie.
All right. Mason, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. Still in Muncie, living in my college house, surviving day to day.
It's all we can do at this point. Pretty much what the saying goes in under normal circumstances. We're all day today. So, folks out there, leave your comments, your questions, your debate topics, and we will serve them up between the three of us, our two experts on Notre Dame football, and myself. Notre Dame has a date with Arkansas of the SEC coming up this season, and one of the reasons why we focus on that is that the University of Arkansas Athletic Department has released a statement as of this morning, courtesy AD Hunter Urachek. He told the Board of Trustees that the school is planning on starting the season as scheduled on September 5th, practice beginning in mid-July. Considering we don't start practice typically until the first week of August, that's kind of odd. Obviously, they're looking at the condensed or no spring practice and trying to extend fall practice, I guess. He said the department has looked into preventative measures to ensure fans can still be in attendance, like disinfecting the stadium, asking fans to maintain social distance, and having employees wear protective gear and related, okay. So, Nathan, a date at Arkansas, at least they're preparing to play on time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really know how to feel about that kind of stuff at this point. I mean, I feel like a lot of universities, whether they've said something publicly or not, are hoping to play with are hoping to play on time. I know Notre Dame is planning to have a lot of recruiting visits here in June. They've canceled some of their bigger stuff, but no, I mean it's a positive that I think the one positive is that they must be hearing something. These universities must be hearing something from either their higher ups or from the NCAA that they feel that they're going to be able to play on time. And I mean, I think we all hope that that's the case. So obviously Notre Dame plays Arkansas this year, and if they're planning to start on time, then that means Notre Dame's probably planning to start on time as well. So I hope it happens, but I think right now it's more he said, she said type stuff.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that too. I think people are trying to stay positive. There's so much negativity going on right now, but it's not necessarily anything groundbreaking. But Notre Dame does play Arkansas on September 12th. It'll be, it's technically the second week of college football since Notre Dame plays in week 0 at Navy. I mean, depending on if that happens in Ireland. But, yeah, it's nothing huge, but it's encouraging, I guess. And everybody's just trying to stay positive in these times, so it's good.
I find it kind of odd that within this statement from the University of Arkansas that they discuss they make mention of social distancing, that there's going to be preventative measures made at the game in regards to disinfecting seats, for example, disinfecting the stadium, but asking fans to maintain social distance. Well, the only way to do that is to say, okay, we've got a 75,000 seat stadium. We're only going to allow 15,000 people at the game, and they're going to have to arrive at these locations at these times, and we're going to have to space them out and allow certain groups of people just into the stadium in certain intervals. I would think that there would have to be a whole process developed to do that. But first and foremost, it would be, we're not going to have a packed stadium or nothing even close to it.
Right. I've actually heard some people say, they might start out with I think 5,000 or less. And even then that's going to mostly be families, media members, stuff like that. And then fans will have to watch on TV for the most part. But I mean, that doesn't really bother me per se. I mean, I maybe make it to one game a year. So I mean, I'm used to watching it on TV. I mean, it's a little weird, obviously, not being able to see fans and whatnot on the screen. But as long as I'm watching the action, I'm not going to personally be too upset about it. I mean, obviously, you're going to have the universities take a hit from a money standpoint or a financial standpoint. But I wonder if there's going to be some sort of deal cut out where, I don't know, like let's just say this year, Notre Dame's playing Clemson. That's probably going to be one of the more higher, rated games in terms of people watching no matter what. Maybe there's some sort of deal that gets cut from, for both teams because, X amount of people are watching or so on and so forth. I think that'd be a kind of a good way to supplement that.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly. I think you have to limit the numbers, but it really gets interesting from a perspective of like a university that really relies on the football team as like a lot of their revenue as far as athletics and even the school as a whole. So when you can't have, your max amount of fans that you normally have at a game and you're limiting them to, whatever amount is decided on, then the amount of money that you're bringing in is not nearly the same. So how do you pay the certain people that are running things? And Notre Dame released a statement today from one of the directors that was saying that certain people within the organization are going to lose 5 to 20% of their pay, which was kind of expected in order for everything to happen. But still, it's crazy and just unforeseen things that are going on today.
Well, Nathan, in regards to the way, the statement you made about what this is going to look and sound and feel like watching at home, isn't it going to kind of have the feel of a spring game? It's gonna look like a spring game. That's the only thing I could relate it to. It's probably not even going to, with 5,000 people in the stands, not even be a spring game compared to what we see at certain venues across the country that have 50 to 100,000 people for spring games. But obviously the intensity, it's not gonna feel as intense as a regular season game, but it's gonna count like regular season games. They are regular season games. It's just gonna be a strange dynamic that it's going to sound like a spring game, or maybe not even that, but it's going to count and be seemingly these coaches are going to have their work cut out for them from the standpoint of just kind of trying to energize their players to go out there, I would think, and lay it all out on the line when there's not going to be that lift of a crowd, the band, the whole atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point there. I mean, I've played. I know Mason played high school athletics, and I did as well, and briefly in college. And I mean, there's obviously a difference when there's a crowd for sure. Obviously, the meaning of the game might help with that. Maybe we don't see as big a home field advantage for some schools, but then at the same time, maybe you see a bigger home field advantage because the team that's traveling is less motivated or not less motivated. That's the wrong terminology, but there's not like a hype that you're like, oh man, we're going to go in and get booed and different things like that. So I think it could go either way depending on the school. But I mean, I think we all are hoping and praying that we'll be at least be able to have some fans there by the first couple weeks.
Yeah, I feel like we share the same opinion in that. I'm just ready for sports to be back, whether or not fans are there or not, limited numbers or not. I need something to watch. I might even tune into the Korean baseball that's supposed to be going on within the next week on ESPN. Whatever I have to do.
It's funny you bring that up, Mason. I just checked out my work schedule for next week, and because I have volunteered to work the event, I'm working crazy hours till 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning overnight because of Korean baseball. But hey, I'm fortunate to have a job. And a good one, so not an issue there. But it's just funny that live sports. We are clamoring and needing live sports, many people. So there you go. All right, talking Notre Dame football. We would ask anybody who's on here that loves Notre Dame football, loves college football in general, because we have representation from all fan bases. Jump in the live chat that you let people know that we're here each and every week at Monday at 6 o'clock Eastern time. A couple interesting commits on the table. One we'll point out here is Philip Riley. Looks like, based on the 247 composite and the crystal ball projections, is that he's leaning Notre Dame, but Virginia Tech's a factor. Top 20 cornerback in the nation out of Florida. So we feeling good about him.
Yeah, I think it was a few weeks ago he tweeted out that he knew where he was going, and that sort of pointed towards Virginia Tech at the time. And it looks like the Notre Dame staff has done a pretty good job since then about getting him to slow down the process a little bit, or maybe even getting him to speed up the process to a certain extent, but choosing them instead of Virginia Tech. So I would say those are probably the top two schools. Washington, I know, is involved. I think he grew up there. I think he's an Army brat type of kid, so he's kind of moved around the country, and Washington was one of his stops. And obviously with Lake as the head coach there, they're obviously going to be a factor for solid DBs. But no, I mean, it looks like here in the last couple of days, Notre Dame's taken the lead there, and he's one of the top quarterbacks in the country, really physical. I kind of, from a Notre Dame standpoint, I kind of liken him to a bigger Julian Love to a certain extent. So he'd be a really big get, especially with the last couple of years for cornerback recruiting.
Yeah, I think there's reason to have cautious optimism. He did tweet, like Nathan said, I had questions, people DMing me about oh, what does this mean? I thought Notre Dame was a player for him. And I mean, I didn't really know what to say at that point because all signs pointed to Virginia Tech. And then it seems like he's slowed down a little bit as far as choosing Virginia Tech. It looks like he wants to make a decision soon. Nobody really knows exactly when that'll be. But it looks like it's down to Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, and Washington, like Nathan said. And, yeah, big-time pickup. Notre Dame struggles to recruit the corner position. And if they can get Riley in, that's big time.
So over the last several weeks, we focused a lot of our discussion on the NFL draft. Please check out those videos. Obviously, recruiting is a constant for any college football team, almost a 365 proposition in regards to discussion and things going on, and this time of year especially. So my question to both of you, I don't think we hit on this last week, but I served this up at some point and we just didn't get around to it, I don't believe. So in your coverage of Notre Dame football and recruiting in recent years, who would be the guy, or of course you can take it down the list, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys that have gotten away that really hurt? Guys that you thought Brian Kelly had a really good shot at, and for whatever reason, they slipped off the fence and went the other way in the final days leading up to National Signing Day.
One that quickly comes to mind is Asa Turner. He ended up at Washington with Jimmy Lake, as I mentioned earlier. He was kind of recruited by Notre Dame as a linebacker, rover type, and Washington was selling him the safety. And I think deep down he really wanted to play safety. It's already looking like he's been moved to linebacker at Washington, which is kind of funny. But no, that was a back and forth battle for a while. It looked like it was going to be Washington. And then on signing day, supposedly he had Notre Dame's papers in front of him. Or I should say early signing day, he had Notre Dame's papers in front of him, decided not to sign, and then ended up committing to, Washington a month or so later and signing with them. So that's definitely one. I don't know, maybe me and Mason can kind of go back and forth here and just kind of mention a few different guys, one after the other.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Asa Turner was on my list as well. Braden McGregor stands out. He's one that Notre Dame fans mention in the message boards all the time. That one, a lot of people felt like he did Notre Dame dirty in that situation. He spoke very highly of Notre Dame and then kind of dissed them in a way and didn't make the staff very happy with that one. Normally, between Nathan and I and a couple other people, we have a feeling going into a commitment, a guy, whether he drops a video or he has a big presentation about which way he's going to go. And people were leaning Michigan, but nobody's really sure. We all tuned in, and then it was definitely Michigan. And the ones to Michigan hurt, being that close to Michigan, it's that one was a tough one. But his recruiting rankings kind of dropped. People have really seen how his character has shown through, and a lot of people don't seem to be fans of him, even Michigan people. So, Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think another big one is Nicholas Petit-Frere. He ended up going to Ohio State. He's from the Florida area. or I shouldn't say the Florida area. He's from Florida, but no, that was a back and forth battle. I think a lot of people thought he was going to pick Notre Dame when Harry Hiestand was on staff, and then when he ended up taking the Bears job, I think that kind of sealed the deal. He had a really good relationship with Harry Hiestand, and obviously Notre Dame has the had the reputation with Harry Hiestand as well as not only a great destination from a recruiting standpoint, but developing and turning them into really good pro prospects as well. So that's definitely that probably hurt the most, especially because you feel like if Harry Hiestand didn't leave, he was 100% Notre Dame. So that one was a big deal.
Another one that stands out to me is JT Daniels, the former USC quarterback. It looked like it was between USC and Notre Dame at the very end of his recruitment. He was a stud at USC until he got injured a couple times, and we'll see what he does with the rest of his career. I still think he's a solid quarterback, but if you got to imagine if he was in South Bend, maybe he doesn't get injured once or twice, he could have been a star. He was a 5-star recruit, and really he could have been that transcendental Notre Dame quarterback that they need. That I think they have in Tyler Buckner actually coming in. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, but the last one I'm going to mention, I figure we could probably do 3 each. Caleb Kelly, linebacker for Oklahoma. It's weird. Notre Dame seems to have this weird reputation that they can't recruit the Fresno area. Whenever they're in on a Fresno kid, they seem to finish number 2. So they do a good job, but then they can't finish the deal. And it's weird. I don't know I don't think it's a Fresno deal. There's nothing wrong with like Fresno going to Notre Dame or anything like that. But it just seems like they always come second fiddle. And a lot of the times it ended up at Oklahoma. For I think one of the coaching staff members, I don't know if he's still there, was from the Fresno area, recruited that area really well. So that was between Notre Dame and Oklahoma. They've lost a few battles to Washington, USC, so on and so forth, Stanford for that level as well. So I know Caleb Kelly hasn't necessarily been the player that he was supposed to be at Oklahoma from a statistical standpoint, but he was a 5-star linebacker, and Notre Dame was really preaching to him the Jalen Smith, Manti Te'o treatment, where he could be that next guy, come in. I believe he won the high school Buckus Award that year, and then they were preaching to him that you could be the next college Buckus Award winner at Notre Dame, and it never happened.
I think my last one, I think I'd be amiss if I didn't mention Randy Moss, actually. Came down between Notre Dame and Marshall. Notre Dame lost out on him. Notre Dame probably – I think he's probably the best wide receiver ever. So Notre Dame could have had the best wide receiver ever, and maybe that changes everything as far as recruiting down the line. Maybe make Notre Dame a wide receiver powerhouse like a USC. Notre Dame's put wide receivers into the league, but they haven't done a ton in the league other than, Golden Tate maybe. But, I think that would have been a crazy one considering he's the GOAT of receivers.
Right. You can't mention Notre Dame and losing out on recruits and not mention Randy Moss if we're going back in time a little bit.
Sounds like we could possibly have a debate, not necessarily with me, but just a general whether we're talking college football or NFL with that GOAT reference. Most people think Jerry Rice is the GOAT. Right? Isn't that pretty much consensus?
I'll let Mason defend himself real quick.
I think just from a game-breaking standpoint and how I think the game was better when Randy Moss played. I think Jerry Rice is number 2, but I think Randy Moss is the clear number 1 for me.
So I think GOAT discussion is sort of weird. You have this kind of debate about new time people versus older time people, and not that Jerry Rice is like old time or anything like that.
Well, those two guys are contemporaries,
right?
So you're actually comparing. They didn't play exactly the same time, but their careers overlapped. So that's more an apt comparison than comparing Jim
like Calvin Johnson, I think, would be
and Adrian Peterson.
Right.
Johnny Unitas and Peyton Manning.
The weird thing I find about kind of just getting back to the point real quick, I think you get this I know a lot of people in my generation think that Calvin Johnson would be the GOAT if he didn't retire at a younger age, and you hear this in the NBA a lot, like LeBron versus MJ. Or like I said, or even maybe more so like LeBron versus like Larry Bird, a white guy that, could shoot it, was lengthy, but maybe not the best athlete comparatively to like all these guys that are around now, evolution, whatever you want to throw it at. And I think that's where, even though Randy Moss and Jerry Rice, they played in the same, time frame to a certain extent, people just kind of viewed Randy Moss as a better athlete. So it kind of goes from statistical analysis versus, flashiness to, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I think that's why a lot of people view the Randy Mosses of the world to be of the GOAT status versus a Jerry Rice who kind of, kills you from a statistical standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree that any GOAT conversation debate is an interesting one. I will take part in just about any of them, but there's a number of ways to look at it. But what interests me with those two is, again, that their careers overlap. Most GOAT conversations, there's a separation of time, and so you got to take it, especially in athletics. If you're talking music or something else, it's easier to compare in certain ways. Obviously, athletics, you have numbers to go by and statistics. But yeah, like the NFL just released its top 100 players of all time. Now, there are players in the list that go back to the 30s and 40s. Do we think that if we could bring them up into a 2020 NFL game that they would be able to compete? I don't think anybody believes that. But we're giving them credibility and respect that they dominated against their contemporaries. So it's almost an analysis or a comparison of how well you are dominating and competing against your contemporaries. Or you could just do it like, hey, I think the best athletes are playing right now. So basically all the GOATs practically have been playing right now or in the last 15 or 20 years.
Right. And I think that's the argument I usually have with people too. Just because I do it with baseball all the time. There's plenty of people that, you can't argue Babe Ruth. If Babe Ruth's the GOAT, no matter what. Now, I don't agree with that necessarily, but I can see the argument, even though it's a different era. And I think it's hard to, it's really hard to debate era, debate position, even. You see it in the NHL all the time. Wayne Gretzky's like the overall GOAT, but I mean, you got guys like Bobby Orr, was one of the best defensemen of all time and, a great scoring defenseman. And then, you got Mario Lemieux, for example, who, his career ended a little bit earlier, because of cancer and other reasons, injuries and so on and so forth. So I think overall you got to go statistics more than anything, because that's really all you have to go off of.
Then Babe Ruth is the greatest baseball player of all time.
He's up there. I'd argue Barry Bonds, but people don't like to hear the steroid stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to hear that either. I think wasn't Ruth the most dominant baseball player of all time? If you just look at what he was doing versus what everybody else was doing at the time, like he was out hitting teams.
Right. No, and I think that's a legitimate argument for sure.
So we digress from Notre Dame slightly.
I think that's another. I don't know. That's another thing, because I mean, maybe there just weren't enough great baseball players back then either. So you put Babe Ruth in the let's just say you move them up to like the 1940s, 1950s, where guys from that era still get argued as not as good as guys from this area from an athletic standpoint, possibly at least. Like then I'd like to see where his stats are, because his overall statistics don't beat necessarily other guys' overall statistics, but you said like his dominance was so much better. Then to me that's a different argument for sure.
Yeah, the home run record was like 11.
Yeah,
it was like 18, and then it was 60. That would be like some guy hitting like 200 home runs right now.
Right, exactly.
All right, we'll get back to Notre Dame football with these fine gentlemen. We got Mason Plummer right there in the middle from Slap the Sign, as well as Nathan Urbach from Slap the Sign. And we've got a Michigan State fan in here wanting to know why that series is no longer, and of course, the Michigan #1 fan. I think the easy answer is there he's asking about the famed arm wrestling match as well. But in regards to the Michigan State series, you guys probably have more insight into it, but I simply think there's not enough slots anymore with the ACC obligations.
Go ahead, Mason.
Yeah, Notre Dame has like 1 foot in, 1 foot out the door with the ACC, and then kind of lost the rivalry games that were a ton of fun with Michigan State, Purdue, schools like that. So I really enjoyed those games. I think it's important from a rivalry standpoint, playing the teams that are around you. To address the rest, are we rivals? I think we're like good friends. I wouldn't say we're rivals. Nathan knows not to step at me, but who won the arm wrestling match? It would be me. It's not if, it's when. So whenever that occurs, it'll be quick.
I lost my train of thought with what you're saying. Oh man, that's funny. It will happen eventually.
We're adhering to social distancing guidelines right now. That is
Right,
put off
yeah.
the arm wrestling match.
Stylites popping off again. Was talking with Nathan last week. Were you guys actually talking about the arm wrestling match?
Yep. It's a true
Said he taught
statement.
Mason everything he knows about lifting, and that he's the alpha. Nathan says it'll be an easy W. Oh, okay.
Not all of that's true. I never said I was the alpha, but the other stuff might have some merit.
I see. Didn't know we were spreading complete lies. Thought we were just messing around a little bit. I see a Mark Rogers for VP 2020.
So, this is the first time this has probably hit this particular live stream, but Kyle Pickett, he regularly throws that up. This is like, I often let people know that, these live streams are just kind of smoke and mirrors. They're just a tool to use for the campaign for 2020 as Kyle is trying to get me on the ticket here. I've yet to be elevated to presidential candidate, but he's got me on the VP ticket for either Sleepy Joe or for Trump. I don't know which way he's going there, but there it is.
I think you'd be better than both. So
Yeah, I think so too. Option C.
We won't go that direction, but I appreciate the support or the lack of trust in the other two. I think it's a little bit more. Speaking of the GOAT, a possible argument could be made for Don Shula. Rest in peace. Unfortunately, passed away at the age of 90 today. I was actually just watching some coverage on that on the NFL Network. Not a whole lot that I didn't know, but still interesting stuff. Of course, the all-time wins leader in the NFL and the only man to coach a team to an undefeated perfect season.
yeah, no, obviously great coach. Had that 1972 season that goes down in history as one of the greatest seasons of all time. I think you got the Patriots that were there kind of recently, and then the 85 Bears are right up there as well as, some of the most dominant teams in history. And, the Patriots didn't end up winning the championship when they did it, so maybe they can't be considered in the combo. But no, Don Shula is one of the greatest coaches of all time. And, I'm glad he was able to live a good life. It seems like 90 years old is a good time to, be okay with maybe that, accepting death and stuff like that without getting too emotional about that kind of stuff. But, I'm glad he was able to live, a long and relatively healthy life.
Yeah, that was before my time, but that's something you hear about growing up, those old Dolphins teams, and definitely one of the greatest coaches of all time for sure. That's too bad. Rest in peace for sure.
An interesting note to the Dolphins' 72 perfect season would be there's several that come to mind, but this one I think is rather strange, knowing what we know about the way the NFL playoffs are formatted. And I'm giving away the answer, but where would you think that the AFC Championship game was played?
Ooh, I don't know.
Well, if you've got a team with a perfect record, obviously it's all formatted based on home field advantage to the teams that win the divisions that have the best record, and it's all formatted right now. But the Miami Dolphins at 15-0 actually had to play a road AFC Championship game in Pittsburgh. They actually played the AFC Championship game on the road as an undefeated team, just because they had like some crazy, like they just like one year the Eastern Division champ hosted, and the next year like the Central Division, and they just kind of alternated. It had nothing to do with their records at the time, and I think that was one of the games and one of the matchups that shook somebody up to think, okay, maybe we should actually award a team that's got an undefeated record that they should be able to play home playoff games.
For sure.
That's one thing that happened there. Yep.
Looks like a lot of people disagreed with us on this Randy Moss and Jerry Rice stuff.
There's all sorts of whack stuff in the comments. Somebody just said the Clemson 2018 team was the best college football team ever.
Hey, I mean, it was up there in my lifetime for sure.
I'm not ready to say it was the best ever. That's a good team, but that's awful bold.
I mean, I would say LSU's team this year was better.
Do you think LSU beats them in a game?
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
2018 team? Okay.
LSU
Probably.
I think LSU, didn't they have one of the best resumes ever or something like that from playing ranked teams, top 10 teams?
Yeah.
They did.
They didn't really play a lot of close games either from what I remember.
Yeah, they played a host of top 10 teams. So that would be Auburn at the time, and Alabama, Florida, Texas was ranked at that point in the top 10. Georgia, of course, in the championship game, and then 2 playoff games against Oklahoma and Clemson. Yeah, if you run down the list of teams that they beat by the end of the deal, it's pretty impressive. Yeah, Clemson, Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Auburn. That's a pretty good run.
But he is right. I mean, that Clemson defensive line was amazing. I mean, I think that's what I think one of them was suspended for was it Dexter Lawrence that was suspended for the Notre Dame game?
Yeah.
So obviously he didn't play, and they still held Notre Dame to 3 points. So I'm definitely not going to argue it. I mean, they're definitely one of the best teams I've ever seen, but I was born in the early 90s, so I can't really comment before that.
Despite having to go through that very difficult schedule, I would have been intrigued by watching LSU have to get through Ohio State and Clemson. Like if they would have not been elevated to number 1 in the final rankings, they were number 2 the week before, just to give them a more difficult game. Not that they wouldn't have won both games, but they set the all-time scoring record, 726 points in a season. So they scored it like nobody has before. And the defense kind of caught up late in the season and played really well as well. So
right, and I think recency bias plays a little bit of a factor. Not with LSU necessarily. I mean, like you said, they have there's plenty of stats that back up a comment like that, and I think even with Clemson, there's plenty of stats as well. But with I think every year you get like, oh, this guy was the best ever at his position for college football or whatever, and then this guy had the best season ever. This team was the best ever. So, I mean, I think you really have to sit back and really, diagnose everything without making comments like that necessarily.
Yeah, I think for an LSU's case, it helps when your offense is putting up 70 points a game. Your defense just needs to keep them under 70. So, I think LSU's up there. I'm trying to think of some other teams that are like GOAT tier.
I mean, I think a lot of people think the Texas team with Vince Young is up there, and maybe even the USC team they beat. I mean, they were both outstanding programs at the time. I'm sure some of these recent
Alabama 2012.
Right, exactly. Some of the more recent Alabama teams can certainly be up there. And then, if we're going all time, then obviously you can throw in some Notre Dame teams. You can throw in some older Alabama teams as well. So no, I mean I think it's a hard argument to discuss.
So Notre Dame got steamrolled by 2 of the best teams ever in the past 2 massive games they played. Awesome.
I would say at least in the last 20 years, yeah. I think that I'm not going to say they were unlucky. I don't think they would have won necessarily against some other teams either. But I mean, definitely, there could have been maybe some other years where they lucked out and somehow were able to win a bigger game.
2008 Florida in the comments. That's a good suggestion.
I'm assuming
I could argue that Notre Dame lost to maybe the most talented team that didn't win a national championship in 2015. That Ohio State team was probably, from a talent standpoint, better than the team the year before that won the national championship because they all hung around. They just slipped up once and missed the playoff at a 12-1. And that team floated. Michael Thomas, Zeke Elliott, Joey Bosa, Aaron Lee. The whole secondary was first-round picks, etc.
I'm pretty sure that was the year that Jalen Smith got hurt.
The late push from Bosa.
I thought it was Taylor Decker.
Was it Decker?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously Bosa's not going to push a defensive player.
I thought it was like special. No, I don't know. I saw something. I thought maybe it's special teams.
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure it was Decker, but regardless, I mean, tragic. But no, that, speaking of really good teams, we could argue that was Notre Dame's most talented team, and then they got hurt. They had a lot of injuries leading up. Now, outside of Smith, I mean, obviously Smith got hurt in the last game, but if you want to argue in the Brian Kelly era, I think there's a legitimate argument for that 2015 team for the best Brian Kelly from a talent standpoint.
So I'm working on a video right now. We're talking about teams being down or being up. So I basically went through all the teams that we would consider to be at the top of college football and kind of the last time that they were down, because some people just can't fathom Clemson being down, for example. I'll just use them for an example. And I went Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, USC, Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, in terms of being down. And I defined down meaning if you have one season at 7-5, you're not down. Like if you're humming along at 11 wins, all of a sudden you go 7-5, then the next year 11-1. It's only 1 year, so it's got to be like 3 or 4 years consecutively that you're quote unquote down. And the next stipulation I put into play that wouldn't affect Notre Dame is that you're not seriously competing for your conference championship. You're not at a 10-2 kind of level, top 10 to 15 in the country. And just kind of ran through, and I'm going to cut a video and post it here soon, looking at each program and when was the last time they were down. I think people will be surprised that don't pay attention to history and maybe are a little younger, of long droughts for schools that we consider to be way up there, like Alabama, like LSU, being down.
I mean, Notre Dame has years like that too.
Yeah, my Notre Dame run
just recently.
I pretty much thought, okay, 2016 is an aberration. That's 1 year. But between 2007 and 11, so that's a 5-year stretch, they were 32-31.
Yeah, not good.
For those 5 years. Pretty much before and after Lou Holtz. Pretty much Jerry Faust, they were just a little over 500 for 5 or 6 years in the early 80s. Then post Lou Holtz with Bob Davie and Ty Willingham, Charlie Weiss.
That's what I was going to say. Weiss and Willingham, that was rough.
Weiss had a few good years because he had some offense. But other than that, I mean, they couldn't stop anyone, and they had no speed on defense. I think the hate, kind of putting this back to Notre Dame a little bit, the hate that Kelly gets is beside me with how he's turned that program around into a consistent, winning program. He had the one bad season where they went, what was it, 4-8 or 3-9, whatever it was. But outside of that, I mean, he has, I think, 5 10-plus win seasons. He has a national championship berth. He has a playoff berth. The recruiting is as good as it has been since Holtz. It's not as good as it was with Holtz. I don't want people to mistake me for saying that, but it's as good as it was. Charlie Weiss had he could land a few top-notch guys, but I mean, coaching, I think, is a factor with that as well. And I don't think they landed the defensive guys they needed to land on a regular basis. So I think Kelly deserves a lot of credit. And if he was at a school like Alabama or Clemson, I think he'd be considered a way better coach than he is right now.
Yeah, I don't really understand the hate for Kelly. I think he does just about as good as he can at Notre Dame, considering all the stipulations that you have coaching at a place like Notre Dame. And I think people are just never going to be happy, whether he's bringing a top recruiting class, he didn't win the big game, or, whatever it may be. You can't please everybody.
So, Nathan, you think that Brian Kelly would have that kind of a claim at Clemson or Alabama because he would go there and he would win to the same level as Dabo and Saban?
So, I mean, I'm not going to put him on the pedestal of a Saban or a Dabo. I mean, I think Dabo did a tremendous job turning around Clemson from the team that, never won the big game to all of a sudden doing that. If Kelly could do that at Notre Dame, then, obviously maybe we're speaking of something a little bit different. But I would argue that if you put him with a program that doesn't have the recruiting restrictions that Notre Dame has and different things like that, then you're going to have, Kelly's going to be able to perform at a better level. I don't think he personally is the recruiter that those guys are, but I think he can bring in guys that are dogs on the trail, and he has shown that. I didn't really want to bring it up, but they might lose out to. It's starting to look like they're going to lose out to Will Shipley here in the next week or 2 weeks, whenever he ends up deciding. At least the last couple hours or so, looks like it's trending back to Clemson, and I don't think that he would lose that battle in other programs. I think that has to do with various factors, but. No, I think Kelly. I'm not saying he's as good as a Saban or a Dabo Sweeney, but I think he's right on that second tier of coaching that can win a national championship with plenty of programs.
On that Shipley topic, we have to have John on the show. If Shipley announces soon, within the next week, if we get to next Monday and he is announced, we have to have John on the show, because hearing him freak out about one way or another is going to be awesome.
Right. And John doesn't hate Brian Kelly. I think he gets a bad rap for being, more of the pessimistic and negative person versus, a little bit more optimistic and positive. But he knows his stuff, and I think he likes Brian Kelly more than maybe some fans of his want to admit. And I'm saying fans of John because John has a little bit of a cult following.
A cult following. Wow. That's
John for sure.
All the time.
The comment section on his YouTube is awesome.
There's a negative side of Notre Dame's fan base that loves John, and John is not nearly as negative as they are, but he feeds them, and it's amazing.
I think because he allows the negativity, like the comments. He just likes the interaction. That's what he always says. So he feeds off that, and yeah, you have to go into his videos or like some of the things he says with what do I want to say, just like just an idea of how he is and with the way he thinks and stuff. And I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I think he is hilarious, and so he makes some good points.
He just wants Notre Dame to be a national champion. That's all.
Yeah.
So we got Richard Hawkins would like me to set you two straight on 2001 Miami. I don't know what there is to set straight. Yeah, they had a ton of talent. I came across a statistic in the last week or two that this is a somewhat surprising, not shocking to me, but Miami has placed the most players on Super Bowl rosters since the beginning of the Super Bowl. I was a bit surprised by that. The program's been way down for the last 15 years, a marginal program. I've detailed that many times to the chagrin of Miami fans that it's been a meaning 55% winning percentage over the last 15 years is pretty marginal, not winning a championship.
They always seem to have talent, and when they produce first or second round talent, those guys seem to work out. That's the biggest thing I've noticed about them. I mean, there's the argument that they're tight end U instead of Notre Dame, and there's a legitimate argument for that if you ask me. Jeremy Shockey, Jimmy Graham, they've had several guys here in the last 15 to 20 years that have produced better at the NFL level than the Notre Dame guys have. So,
Starlight, good call. Joey Bosa did get ejected for that.
Maybe that's what I was thinking.
Hit on Jalen Smith. That was a hit on.
Yeah, it was. He got ejected in that game, but he wasn't the guy, Smith. It was Taylor Decker, Mason. Just accept it.
You know what? Well, I was trying to figure out which dirty Ohio State player it was, and they all run together.
Yeah, don't get Dennis Wilson going.
Wow.
I hope he says something, or wherever Ohio State fan says something on here too. You can't argue that. That's facts. The play was over, and it was Taylor Decker. I concede that. I just watched the video while you guys were talking, and if the play's over for like 5 seconds, he sprints over and pushes him. Like, why? And he does stuff like that in the NFL too, so I don't want to hear it.
Play to the whistle, right?
Or 30 seconds after it, same thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely hurts more that it almost ended Smith's career. So that obviously was a big deal. If it was a push and he didn't get hurt on the play, then no one would care as much. But it's always the plays that are somewhat dirty and then they turn into a major injury that kind of go back and you look like that.
Right, and he's carving out a great NFL career still, but you got to wonder how great he could have been. And sometimes it keeps me up at night still thinking about how great he could have been without Brian Van Gorder as a defensive coordinator, but that's a whole different topic.
I think the biggest thing that bothers me about that is whenever you hear about like Notre Dame first rounders or whatever, like I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were kind of going down. It was actually a podcast saying how Ohio State's underperformed a little bit because of how many people they've produced and put into the NFL in the last 5 to 10 years. I think in the last 5 years they have they're the only team that's produced 2 top 5 picks, and they've done it twice. So it was kind of like how Ohio State's great, but they've sort of underperformed based on what they've done for NFL standards. And they mentioned something about how, like, I think it was actually Clemson. They were like, oh, well, this guy could have been a first rounder if he didn't get hurt. And in my head, I'm thinking Smith was a top 10 pick if he didn't get hurt. And no one seems to mention that about Notre Dame. I mean, he was the best outside of maybe Quentin Nelson and I guess Ronnie Stanley, because they both went number 6 overall. He was by far the best Notre Dame prospect of the last 20 years. And people forget that because he got hurt, and he's never mentioned as like a quote unquote first rounder, even though he would have been probably a top 5 pick.
This is where I think that the playoff is a little bit overstated, because obviously, as I will talk on here ad nauseum, it's not an objective system. So can anybody out there give me a guess on how many games Ohio State's lost in the last 8 years? What would be the guess?
I'm going to go less than 10.
Go with 7.
Well, that would be a lot of undefeated seasons in there. So by my quick count, they've lost 10 games in 8 years. So they're losing 1 game a year. It's kind of difficult to play too much better than that. I'm guessing that would be the best, maybe tied with Alabama, best record. And I know between Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State in the last, 9 years, that they're all playing at some 92 or 3% winning percentage. It's kind of hard to win many more games than that.
Right. And I'll be honest, I wasn't necessarily agreeing with the podcast. I just thought it was an interesting point, because I think, what does Ohio State have? 1 championship in the last 10 years, or do they have 2? Just one. So I think the point was that they're producing NFL talent better than even Clemson and Alabama, if you base it off like maybe 10 years or so, and they haven't won the championships that those teams have.
Oh, I get the argument. I get it. Kyle Pickett, why wasn't Florida State featured in your down video? So I've yet to produce my video, so I will include them right here. Florida State's easy, Kyle. Last 3 years, 7-6, 5-7, 6-7. What's that, like 1 game under 500? There's their downtime. It's right now. 3 consecutive years playing under 500 football. It's pretty bad.
But yet they have one of the best teams of the last 10 years too, so it's interesting.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, there was a team. There was they were kind of the anti-LSU when it comes to a scheduling factor. Now, certainly they wiped everyone out. They beat a really good Auburn team in the national championship game, but that was the last year of the BCS, so they didn't have to play a playoff game. Right. And they destroyed a horrible ACC. Duke was their opponent in the ACC championship game.
ACC's
been
weird.
Great team. Dabo Sweeney. Here's my next. I'll throw this one at you. In the 40 games prior to Dabo Sweeney at Clemson, how many games do you think Clemson won? What do you think their record was? 40 games in those.
What? Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
In the seasons prior to Dabo Sweeney, in the 40 games prior to him showing up at Clemson.
How many games did they lose or win?
What was their record in 40 games?
Okay. Ooh. I'm going to go with 30-10.
What popped in my head is 27-13.
22-18. Pretty marginal. They were pretty marginal.
Well, Dabo's been there for a while, right? It took him a while to make that program.
Yeah, he wasn't. He had a 7-loss season.
Right. Yeah, because
that's what we talked about with the big-time quarterback commit, and then it changes everything.
Right. Well, and I mentioned it earlier. Like they for a while they couldn't get over the hump, and then all of a sudden, they won one big game, and boom, there it is. They got Deshaun Watson, like you just said, Mason, and it's changed. So hopefully that's Tyler Buckner for Notre Dame.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, Mason Plummer, Slap the Sign, Nathan Urbach. You can catch him at the same site. Slap the Sign. We talk Notre Dame football here each and every week, unless you guys see any other topics here.
Someone just asked who the worst team to make the playoff was, and someone said it was Notre Dame. No surprise that it was Dennis Wilson, but I think it's 100% Michigan State.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's probably the answer.
Didn't Notre Dame beat Michigan State the year they made the playoff?
Michigan State lost to Nebraska, a 5-win Nebraska team that year.
Okay.
Maybe
it was the year prior to that.
They did. Michigan State won the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl in 2013. That was 2 years before their lone loss was at Notre Dame.
Okay.
Yep.
I would throw one of the Oklahoma teams in there as well. Just their defense is always bad.
The only thing with the Oklahoma matchups is like every time I look at it, I feel like they deserve to be there. And it goes back to what I was saying about you can't have this like bias of, okay, the team got, shellacked the year before, so all of a sudden you can't put them in. It seems like Oklahoma always deserves to be there, or at least should be 5th. I mean, at the very least. And that's why it's hard for me.
I don't disagree with your Michigan State selection, but once Mason throws out Oklahoma, the thing that comes to mind, in addition to the defensive issue, is that they're generally winning a lesser conference than what Michigan State won that year. I do not think Michigan. So the Michigan State team that went to the playoff was in place of the Ohio State team that played Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl. That was the best team in the Big Ten based on every kind of metric, but they didn't win. So that's the way it is. So then Michigan State goes to the playoff and they get annihilated.
Right.
But there's certainly a good argument there. I would tend to agree. That's a pretty close call. Michigan State.
You mentioned Washington too. I mean, Washington probably has to be thrown in there as well because, I mean, the Pac-12's garbage at the moment.
There's your team. I think that's your team, and here's the reason why. Not that they played the worst game in the playoff, but that Washington team played a lousy schedule. They played in the Pac-12, as you mentioned. Their big non-conference win was against Rutgers, and like they had one of the worst schedules in the country, and their one loss was to USC at home by 2 scores. Yeah. So USC kind of proved that they were the best team in the Pac-12. That was the USC team that went on to win the Rose Bowl. They probably should have been in the playoff. But, yeah, Washington, I think they probably had the worst track record resume to make it.
And I think they had Jake Browning at quarterback that year, and he looked lost in that playoff game. I mean, I've seen some
he was a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. I think that game ended any talk of him playing in the NFL, essentially.
Yeah, I think you guys can defend your Fighting Irish of 2018 pretty well on that worst playoff team. I think you're cushioned a little bit, especially since you went undefeated against a decent schedule. What should be a great schedule, the way it was scheduled, but it turned out to be a decent schedule.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like it's behind us. At the same time, I think that the game would have been a lot closer if Julian Love didn't take himself out. They wouldn't have scored more than 3 points still, but it might not have been 30-3. It might have been 17-3. Not that that's really a consolation prize of any means, but if they lose that game 17-3 versus 33-3, people look at that a lot differently, and they say, okay, well, their defense actually, they held the quote unquote best Clemson team or best team ever, according to some.
Yeah, and Dante Vaughn gets torched. Justin Ross makes a few insane catches. Just a lot of things went against Notre Dame. But, yeah, either way, they're losing that game, so it's a consolation prize. But, Notre Dame just got to get better in that sense.
The
Go ahead, Nathan.
I was saying the big issue there was depth. I think me and Mason talked about this right after the game. Notre Dame showed that they didn't have the depth to compete at the level of a Clemson or Alabama. I mean, at that point in time, Julian Love was maybe the best cornerback in the country from a college football standpoint, not necessarily a draft standpoint, so on and so forth. But when Julian Love was in the game, people just didn't throw at him. And when he left, they instantly threw at Dante Vaughn. And, you saw it this year. Vaughn barely played for Notre Dame, and he ended up being a UDFA signing in the draft, but I don't think that's going to last very long.
Actually, there can be some comparisons made between the Notre Dame effort against Clemson and the Michigan State 2015 effort against Alabama in this way. If you're watching Clemson Notre Dame, and there was only like 5 minutes left in the half when that game was like 3-3, right? It was pretty close to half.
It happened quickly.
And, yeah, it happened quickly. Where my feeling was, okay, I think Clemson's better, but if Notre Dame if they can just get to the half, regroup. Maybe this starts to become, they grind the clock and it becomes like a late third quarter game and it's still 6-3 or 10-3 or something. Anyway, they just need to get to the locker room, and they couldn't do that. And Michigan State, actually, that was a scoreless game with Alabama with like 5 or 6 minutes left in the first half. Alabama scored a touchdown. Connor Cook brought Michigan State all the way down the field into the red zone, down to like the Alabama 7 or 8 yard line, threw a pick in the end zone that would have tied the game, maybe taken them to half at 7-7, but it was 7-zip, and then they get obliterated 38-0 in the second half. So,
and correct me if I'm wrong, it was the Clemson game 2018 where Claypool recovered that muffed punt or kick, right? And then there was like a foot out of bounds or something.
Which I still don't think it was.
It wasn't, but then that's a quick 7 for Notre Dame, and then the whole game's changed.
That's similar to in the 2012 championship game. And again,
Tyler
I don't
Eifert.
think anyone here is making any argument that these Notre Dame teams would have won these games, but it just extends the clock, the drive, the whatever. Tyler Eifert,
yes,
I remember making some long catch the first or second drive of that game, and for some reason they didn't give it to him.
Yep.
He caught the ball. It was like a 35-yard play.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because I was about to bring it up.
I remember stupid things like this, and I had no investment in the game. I could care less, but I just remember college football stuff.
For as bad as Notre Dame lost that game after, pretty much from that catch on,
yeah.
I don't think you could not convince me there was a better player on the field than Tyler Eifert that day. I thought Tyler Eifert was the best player on that field. And that doesn't mean, he was a tight end. So just because you have the best tight end on the field doesn't mean you have the best team by any means. It's not,
sure.
For all intent and purposes, it's not, the most important or even relatively close to the most important position on the field. But if from a college football standpoint, from a draft perspective standpoint, at that time, I forget the exact, if Alabama had a few players go ahead of him that year, but he went number 21, which is obviously incredible for a tight end in general. And if he didn't get hurt in the NFL, I think we're talking about a Hall of Fame tight end. I think it was his second year he led the league in touchdowns. So no, I don't think you could convince me there was a better player on that field.
A small anecdote from me, that was the worst. It shows my age, but that was the worst 12th birthday ever. I turned 12 on the day Notre Dame played Notre Dame, Alabama. I was so hyped. I had all my buddies over. I was like, Notre Dame's winning the national championship. And then I think I cried a little bit, actually. 12 years old, and it was horrible.
That's funny you say that because my birthday, I know we share, our birthdays very close to each other, and I had a lot of friends over for that as well. I was a little bit older. I was already in college. But we, my best friend bet on Notre Dame because I convinced him that it was a good bet. And no.
I've learned to not bet on Notre Dame. I'm not a betting guy to begin with, but don't do it.
I just hate when something like that happens in a game. And again, Alabama was by far the better team. It was a blowout, all that business. But it just, you got a first down out at like the Alabama 45 or whatever it was. And just to see what would have happened, they would have extended the drive. Who knows? They keep the drive going instead of punting at their own 15-yard line. And then
I think it was a 40-yard catch too. It was a big play. It wasn't just some like 10-yard reception or something like that. It was a big play. I think he was double covered and caught it over 2 guys. So, Tyler Eifert was an amazing amazing talent before all the injuries.
I think there's so many what ifs when I think of that catch sticks out, as well as in 2013 the Florida State game. I'm trying to think of there's more, but there's so many what ifs that, like, say that play Clemson. So say both of the, I mean, Notre Dame's going to lose to Alabama regardless, but if let's say that catch happens against Florida State and it stands and there isn't a BS call on it, then what happens? And just the trajectory of the program, 7 years later we're at now, but just things could have been changed from one play, and people don't really realize that.
Yeah, maybe we're landing Will Shipley tomorrow. Who knows?
So were you guys talking about the pick play down at the goal line?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the Clemson game, obviously, which I think ended up being, a 2-point game where Notre Dame fumbled on the goal line and then still scored after that. And crazy. Too many what-ifs, though, for being honest.
So in the 2013 draft, Alabama had 3 players drafted in front of Tyler Eifert. D. Milner to the Jets at number 9, Chance Warmack to the Titans at number 10, and DJ Fluker, offensive tackle, to the Chargers at 11. They had 3 consecutive first-round picks.
So all premium.
Fluker's the only one that stands out to me.
Right. Well, not only that, but all premium positions. I mean, 2 offensive linemen in a corner.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, you're expected. I mean, it's like how this year Cole Kmet was the top tight end of the draft. He fell all the way to 43, just because tight ends aren't necessarily considered to be. I mean, you got the guys. I mean, Hawkinson last year went top 10, but that's pretty rare. So.
Yeah, and tight ends come a dime a dozen if you're a Bears fan, huh? Just keep 15 of them at once.
Exactly.
Yeah, offensive linemen are extremely important, of course, and the unit could be argued to be the most important on the field. It's just difficult to track unless they become all-pro players how good they were in the NFL. Like, I can't tell you, I know of the players and that they were drafted there, but Warmack and Fluker, I don't know how good they are in the NFL. I don't know if they were.
Fluker's been pretty good. And I think Warmack, actually, he's still in the league from my understanding. I don't know how great he is, but yeah, no, I mean, they're certainly a more premium position than tight end overall. And
now, if there's a good trivia question to throw out to stump someone, it would be, this has to be the least known, I would think, number 1 overall selection in the NFL draft ever. And I just threw this out like a couple nights ago to somebody who was arguing with me that, not arguing, we were just having a discussion that he thought just there was a big bias toward the elite programs and the big programs. And I said, do you know who was the number 1 overall player taken in the 2013 draft and where they played?
Was that? Oh, hold on.
The number 1 overall player in the 2013 draft. This just still astounds me.
That wasn't Winston, was it? That was before Winston. That's FSU, though.
That was the year before, yeah.
Year before?
No, 2 years before, I guess.
I don't remember.
I have no idea.
Eric Fisher, offensive tackle, Central Michigan, number 1 overall pick.
Didn't really turn out to be that great either.
Who took him? Who had the number 1 pick?
The Chiefs,
right? Yep.
Guess it didn't hurt him in the long run.
Yeah, I think they're doing okay.
When you land Mahomes, how they did, then you can.
For all the money and effort and resources and all the intelligence poured into the NFL draft, it's amazing how many picks are misses, even in the top 15 to 20 selections of the NFL draft.
Speaking of money, the amount of money Patrick Mahomes is going to get coming soon. Ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
All right, guys. Good show. Thanks for kicking it around. Got Mason Plummer, Slap the Sign, Nathan Urbach as well from Slap the Sign. Please join them covering Notre Dame athletics. And we'll see everybody back here next week. Please like the video as well. All right, guys. We'll see you later. Nathan's checked out on us, I guess.
All right. Thanks, Mark.